Hey, Michael Leckie here with a brief special edition of our Career Ask Me Anything that normally Mark Bowden and myself do. We wanted to get out right away to today for some interesting news that happened politically, which we thought begs a lot of really interesting leadership questions. One of them that came up, we're actually recording these, and Faye, my intrepid producer here, said, okay, here's a tough one. What about the fact that people are already attacking Kamala Harris and her candidacy for her gender, for her race, and interestingly, for the tone of her voice, which some of them I just don't like it. Interesting things that they're picking on and choosing to react to. So it kind of begged the question for me, and this is a wide open question and probably one that I am foolish to address, being a cisgendered heterosexual white male here of the 50s age. But what about women in leadership, and how is it different to be a leader as a woman? Obviously, not being a woman, I am not well placed to address this personally. But what I can tell you is that I have worked with and for and had work for me a lot of women in the course of my long career. I find it interesting that there's only one statistic I ever cite, or one fact I ever cite about gender when I'm talking to groups and gender comes up, and it's this, is that generally research has shown that the more women you have in senior leadership positions, the more successful a company is. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of great data on gender, but that's a really interesting one. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. I happen to be a huge proponent of women in leadership, and I have had the privilege to promote and hire a lot of women in leadership positions and watch them really flourish, especially in places where they were up against the sexism, in some cases where they're up against the racism as well, and the way that people react. And I think that there's a very simple reason for that. We've gotten really, well, there's a lot of reasons for it. Let me not be overly facile. But there is one simple reason for it that emerges for me is we've gotten overly used to the images that we get fed of leaders. And still, many, if not most of them, are male. Many leaders look like me. I step into a room and start talking in a direct voice and a loud voice with confidence. People are just going to assume that I'm a leader of some sort. It's not hard for them to imagine because they've been looking at guys with white skin and some gray hair for a long time as leaders. And so we have sort of this image. And now we have a woman step into the picture for the highest office in the land of the United States, who is a woman of color, of mixed race, who is a woman, and who doesn't have a voice like a man, doesn't have one of these voices. So what? Right? I mean, it's stupid, but yet we've allowed it to get into our brains. So one of the first things we need to do when looking at any leader, regardless of where they come from, is realize that we are prejudiced. Now, may not be racist, but we all have prejudices. I will never forget my mother growing up in Montana. Montana was a very racially non-diverse area. In fact, the biggest kind of racially diverse group besides Caucasians were indigenous peoples, American Indians, if you will. And there were a lot of indigenous people, and a lot of them lived in reservation land. And then there was many that went to school with us, but that was really the only kind of group that we had that was different. And my mom was working one day at work, late at her office, and she startled easily. Poor mama used to always sneak in and say boo, and as a kid, she hated it. And all of a sudden she heard this chicka, chicka, chicka rattle at her door, and she looked up, and there was a black man standing at the door, and she screamed. And then she paused and realized that she's easily startled, and that he looked horrified, that he was standing there with a briefcase and a suit and these wild eyes. And she thought, oh my gosh, this is a young man who's just selling something. He didn't know the door was locked. He went to open it. That made it rattle. And I screamed. She went, she opened the door, she introduced herself, said most people were gone, and she apologized to him. But she felt really bad later, and she said, I realized that I don't think I'm a racist person, but I had a prejudice because the only time I see anybody of male of color rattling a door is on some crime show on TV, especially in the era that she grew up in. So she had these prejudices. So we have to realize that we are prejudiced people by nature. We are prejudiced to look at people like us, that sound like us, that think like us, that talk like us, because we've evolved to desire tribe and a sense of tribe and belonging. And you can't have belonging without exclusion. So the first thing we have to do is recognize that we're prejudiced. And the second thing is we have to say, well, what really matters here? And what about her is going to impact the things that she believes and the policies that she creates and the outcomes that she strives for? Well, certainly not her tone of voice. So let's set that one aside. And if we're saying that, I don't know, I want her president, our tone of voice, we probably should realize that we're really being kind of stupid and petty. Second of all, we have to look at then gender and race. How is that going to impact things? Well, likely she's going to be supportive of other races. So if you are actually racist, yeah, she's probably not your candidate. And if you're actually happy being sexist, she's probably not your candidate. But for the rest of us, we're going to be able to look past that if we get past our minor prejudices and say, which ones of these are minor prejudices that just really don't matter? And I need to strip it back to something I talked about in an earlier video. What is she saying she stands for? What is she shown to have stand for? What is she saying she wants to accomplish? And how is she going to get that done? Listen to those things, and then you can let your heart follow. I know this one's kind of long, but how does that apply then to leadership? Well, one of the things we need to make sure that we do in leadership is try and do two things. A, look at things as neutrally as possible, stripping out gender and race and things like that. And then also look at how our assumptions about what's good are fueled by those prejudices. For example, do we have a belief that going to certain universities makes you a better candidate for a job? And are those universities ones that have traditionally for years been universities that were really diverse or really only recruited a certain type of student? What kind of population do they have? Universities strive for diversity, but there still is a huge economic factor and a legacy factor in getting into universities. So maybe we should set aside the universities because the school system is changing drastically and look at what they've accomplished in their job. What did they study? Useful. What have they done with it? Even more useful. So we have to realize we are riddled with little tiny prejudices that don't make us bad people. They just make us people with a filter. And we need to think about which of those filters serve us and which of those filters cloud what we're actually seeing with any leader. I'm Michael Leckie. This is our Career Ask Me Anything, our Kamala Harris, Joe Biden political spin on it for the week with myself. Mark Bowden will be back with me for the next one. So please feel free to give me your comments, give me your questions on this, and then any comments and questions you have for our Career Ask Me Anything in the future, you can put them down right below in the box there, whatever medium you're looking at, or you can go to my website, michaelleckie.com/ask, and you can ask any question you want, and we'll be happy to address your career Ask Us Anything questions. Take care. Have a great day.